right? So is this something that now is becoming a social contagion? Because I've seen some of these folks on TikTok.
Ruslan.
If you didn't notice, there's been a huge influx of people being diagnosed with neurodivergent different disorders, primarily autism, within the last couple of decades. Now, it's led some to speculate that it has something to do with the, I can't say the word because the video will get demonetized. Others have said, well, it's simply because we've gotten better at the testing of things like autism and the consolidation of Asperger's and autism into one disorder. I'm not quite sure what the issue is, but I'm not going to speculate on exactly why there's an increase. What I do want to point out is some of the interesting conversations and dialogues around this entire debacle. So here is a video from a doctor that I've been watching recently. Her name is Sabine Hassenfelder, okay? And she has some bad takes, some good takes, but this one I found extremely interesting, and I wanted to share this with you guys so that you guys can kind of see some of the conclusions of how this is being framed with this conversation. All right, so check this. This was called "Why is Everyone Suddenly Neurodivergent?" All right, check this out.
Hey, this is a brand new shirt from our He is Him collection. Who is Him? Jesus is Him. Jesus is God. Jesus is the Savior. Jesus is King. He died and rose so we could be in right standing with God. And when we put this shirt on in the morning, it reminds us of just that and helps us make a statement to the rest of the world. So go to blessgod.shop and pick up yours today. Only available this Friday through Sunday only.
According to the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, autism spectrum disorder is a mental health disorder. However, a lot of people with ASD and other conditions that have traditionally been labeled disorders feel that description is inappropriate. Just because they're not typical doesn't mean there's something wrong with them.
So Asperger's is now packaged into this, and people who are not typical don't like it being called a disorder.
The term that many of them prefer is that they are neurodiverse as opposed to neurotypical. The term neurodiverse refers to a group, whereas an individual would be described as neurodivergent. Neurodiversity includes not just ASD, but also attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, dyslexia, and a few other conditions. The term neurodiversity was coined in the late 1990s by the Australian sociologist Judy Singer, loosely based on the expression biodiversity. She saw it as an extension of social justice movements that had given women and rights they should have had all along. Singer argued that neurodivergent people had not been given their rightful place in society either, and it was about time to stop pathologizing them.
Okay, so far they're talking about neurodivergent people not having the same rights in society, and we don't need to pathologize. I'm like, all right, I'm tracking. All right, check. But this goes left.
The neurodiversity movement weaved together with the American social justice movement and developed an extremist part. By 2013, some neurodiversity advocates wrote that autism and ADHD are the result of normal natural variation in the human genome. By 2019, some said that the real problem is the dominant ableist culture of society that sets standards for what it means to be normal.
So somehow the people who are not neurodivergent got lumped into the realities of systemic oppression in society. That's where this is going.
An ableist is someone who believes that typical abilities are superior.
An ableist is someone who believes that typical abilities are superior. Well, I guess it would just depend on what you mean by typical abilities and in what sense superior. There are folks who have autism disorder who are going to be better at some things, right? Perhaps memory, perhaps remembering formulas or patterns, and they're going to be superior in certain aspects, and in other aspects, maybe they won't be as engaged in the ability to, I don't know, engage socially.
If you're neurodivergent but have internalized ableism, you may mistakenly blame yourself for the challenges you face, when in fact the problem lies with the societal barriers and discrimination that make it harder for neurodivergent people to thrive.
So then she talks about internalized ableism.
Some of them have put the idea of treating autism on the same level as the idea of treating. For example, Autism Speaks is a charitable organization with the stated goal of creating an inclusive world for all individuals with autism throughout their lifespan. They partnered with Google on a project called Missing to develop a database to identify genetic variants of autism. On their website, they describe the project's mission as to identify many subtypes of autism with the goal of developing more personalized and effective treatments.
That sounds rather nice, right? Autism Speaks database provides data for world's largest autism whole genome sequencing study, revealing 137 autism-linked genes. That sounds cool, right? I guess, helping understand the different variations of what's going on in the genome. But
2 years ago, the project was decried by some people on Twitter as eugenics, the Nazi doctrine of cleaning society from genetically inferior groups, which back then included disabled and autistic people. It seems to me that these tweets attacking the missing project were severely misrepresenting what the project website stated. Nevertheless,
so is that what they actually believe? Autism Speaks does not speak for me and is widely considered a hate group by the autistic community? Is this true? Here's an info group on why. Also, here's the original image based on this. So is it a hate group? I'm so confused because it seems like they were attempting to do some good things.
Autism Speaks.
Friends of mine with autism do not like Autism Speaks. Okay. Okay.
Which I remind you is a charitable organization that supports autistic people, has been labeled a hate group by some activists.
Is it a hate group though? Is it a hate group? Because I'm still not tracking on what the critique is. Autism Speaks considers the facts. Is it a hate group?
This extreme position seems to be held by a small group that is vocal on Twitter, and I don't think it's representative for the neurodiversity community as a whole, but it's clearly a sentiment that exists. Fast forward to 2023, and TikTok is full of teenagers celebrating their neurodiversity, some of them self-diagnosed. Now, you might say there's nothing wrong with teenagers wanting to feel good about themselves, and I fully agree. The neurodiversity movement has a point. Our world is built for typical people, and typical people are often not mindful of those who are less typical. In most cases, I think not so much because typical people are actively mean, but passively careless. If you're too tall or too short, too loud or too quiet or too anything really, you'll have trouble fitting in. Some people's brains don't work like yours, but that doesn't mean they are the problem. The problem might be that you're not making the necessary effort trying to understand them. Paying attention to those outside a standard deviation of the average makes their lives easier and enriches our society. That sounds all well and good. Problem is that most neurodivergent people you see on TikTok are those well enough to produce TikToks.
Right. So is this something that now is becoming a social contagion? Because I've seen some of these folks on TikTok. And so to her point,
most neurodivergent people you see on TikTok are those well enough to produce TikToks. And in contrast to being female, ASD can in severe cases significantly impair a person's ability to live independently. This is why the neurodiversity movement has seen somewhat of a backlash in recent years, primarily from caregivers of people with level 3 ASD who feel like talking about internalized ableism doesn't help. For example, the London-based neurobiologist Moab Constandi has written an article for Eon titled Against Neurodiversity, in which he draws attention to a worrying trend of romanticizing autism that has extended to other conditions that can be severe, debilitating and life-threatening, such as depression and schizophrenia. He writes that the idea that autism is a variation of normal is at odds with scientific understanding of the condition, and that in their zealous pursuit of autistic rights, some advocates have become authoritarian and militant, harassing and bullying anyone who dares to portray autism negatively or expresses a desire for treatment or cure.
Wow. The fact that this got turned into another radicalized issue is very interesting.
Tom Clements, who is autistic himself, wrote in an opinion piece in The Guardian that many now self-identify as autistic as though autism were a fashion label rather than a debilitating disorder. And that such an attitude has led to the marginalization of autistic people who, by virtue of their disability, are unable to speak and rely on others to do so on their behalf. Some neurodivergent people have pushed back, pointing out that Clements used the term high-functioning to refer to himself, and that such functioning labels should not be used because they suggest some people with ASD do not need help. Others complained that Clements is a very active troll who spends a lot of time misrepresenting the neurodiversity movement, and that he accuses autistic people of not actually being autistic.
Whoa.
I didn't know anything about this when I started making this video. I was just trying to understand the symptoms of autism and had no idea the topic had become so controversial.
Yeah, I didn't either.
Hey, this is a brand new shirt from our He is Him collection. Who is Him? Jesus is Him. Jesus is God. Jesus is the Savior. Jesus is King. He died and rose so we could be in right standing with God. And when we put this shirt on in the morning, it reminds us of just that and helps us make a statement to the rest of the world. So go to blessgod.shop and pick up yours today. Only available this Friday through Sunday only.